My name is Caroline. I'm a neuroscience major, and I will tell you how you can improve your life by knowing how your brain works. Epigenetics is the area that studies how external factors can modify how our genes are expressed. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to modify itself. It is proven that your brain cannot tell the difference between a real versus an imaginary situation. One day or day one. 3, 2, 1, action. Hello everyone, and welcome back to one more episode of Pronoia. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how our habits can change our brain. My name is Caroline. I'm an international student from Spain, currently studying the USA Neuroscience and Finance. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about how you can change your habits so you can improve your life. So, I make paper for one of my classes about how our brains change, how our habits change our brains. So today I wanted to talk to you about this paper that I did and just share with everyone so we can all benefit from it. So I have my paper here, so I'm gonna be reading it and also explaining it with a little bit of examples. But if you're listening to this on Spotify, you can also just listen to it and you will hopefully understand everything. So our habits change our brains, and the things we do every day affects the way our genes are expressed, and therefore it determines the actions we take. So epigenetics is the area that studies how external factors change the way our genes are expressed. This doesn't mean our genes change. Our genes are determined genetically. However, the way that these genes are expressed depend on external factors. For instance, let's say that someone has the genes to be tall. So supposedly they will be tall because of those genes. However, depending on the food that they eat and how the exercise that they do, these genes may not be expressed as well as they could if that person had a good diet and a good physical activity. So today I'm going to talk to you about how I rewire my brain to achieve my goals and how you can do the same. But first, we need to know how our mind works. So I talk about epigenetics, which is how our genes are expressed and how external factors determine those things. So there's 3 ways in which our genes are expressed. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about science, but I'm going to make it really simple so you all understand. So all of us know, so the first method on which genes are expressed is DNA methylation. So we all know that we have DNA, okay? So DNA is like a long chain. I have here these, but if you are not watching the video, just imagine like a long chain. And then, so DNA methylation works by adding a chemical group to DNA. It's like adding an extra little ball here with a different color. That's adding a chemical group to DNA. So depending on the location, depending where you put that extra chemical, so here or here, it can block the proteins that read the gene. So we have DNA. DNA is like basically like paper, right? Like a book. And the proteins are the ones that read that book. So it doesn't matter what is written. What it matters is what is read, like what people read. So DNA is like the base, but genes express that. Genes are the translators of DNA, right? So depending on the adding of chemicals, the protein is going to read the DNA differently, which is going to produce different types of genes. So methylation turns genes off. So you add a chemical, it turns genes off. However, if you take a chemical, it turns genes on. So that's one method. Another method is histone modification. So histone, basically DNA is this, and histone is like these little balls. So the DNA wraps around like this, like in a tightly packed way. So histones are the ones that make the DNA being this highly packed. Okay, so you can see here. So what happens is that when it's highly packed, the proteins kind of read the gene because it's highly packed, right? So the genes cannot read the DNA, so the genes are turned off because they cannot read the DNA. However, when histones are loosely packed, so it's a little more freely packed, then DNA can be accessed by proteins, so the proteins can read the genes, so the genes are turned on, okay? So we can see how chemical groups can be added or removed from histones, and this makes histones be more tightly packed or more loosely packed, which impacts the way the proteins read the genes, which means that the genes are turned on or off. And the third way is non-coding RNA. So we have DNA, which is basically the base of everything, of genetics. So DNA is copied by RNA, okay? It's like a copy of DNA. However, this copy of RNA, one part works, another part doesn't work. So the part that works is called coding RNA, and that's the one who's being used, but the non-coding part, that's not being used. But that's basically, then the part that is not being used, called non-coding RNA, helps to control gene expression by attaching to the part that actually works. So this also affects how proteins modify histones, turning genes off and on. So this is a little bit of science behind. Just if you are interested in those things, you can look at it more deeply, but hopefully you understand that method. So there's three ways. I'm going to repeat it. The first one is DNA methylation. The second one is histone modification. And the third one is uncoding RNA. Pretty simple, okay? If you're not a science person, this doesn't matter much, but I still want you to learn something. So how we can translate these in our daily life so we can use this information to make our lives better, basically. So we see that external factors such as behavior and the environment can affect the way our proteins read the gene, right? How our proteins read the DNA. So as I said before, DNA is like the words, but the proteins are the ones in charge of reading those words, and that's what matters. And that's what determines what genes are how genes are expressed. So the same happens with our brains and our traits. So by knowing that, we can change how our brain works based on our behavior. But how is our brain does this? So I have here a shape of the brain. So here you have your brain. So basically the brain is this beautiful structure and is all formed and connected by neurons. Neurons are these little cells that basically form the brain. So they communicate between each other. It's like little humans, and they communicate between each other like, do this, do that, do this, do that, right? So all of them are connected. All of them speak their own language. So when neurons connect each other, like when I'm talking with my neighbor who's next to me and I say, hey, do this, I'm talking the same language, there's like a bridge that is formed, like a connection that is formed between me and my partner, the person who's next to me. So next time I'm talking to him or to her, or next time I'm talking to my partner, it's gonna be easier because I already made that bridge, right? So it's like, hey, do this, hey, do that. So neurons work the same way. You have a neuron, and when you are doing something for the first time, the neuron has to communicate with a different neuron. So they make this bridge, right? And the next time they have to communicate, it's going to be much easier because the bridge is already formed. So that's like with everything else. So what happens is that when you do something so many times, that path is reinforced by more neurons to a point in which it's like more likely that you do something unconsciously than consciously, right? So a lot of times you do things that you're not aware of it because it's just a habit, like a routine. So there's a neuropsychologist called Donald Hebb, and he said, neurons that fire together wire together, meaning that the more our brain does a certain task, the stronger the neural network becomes, making the process more efficient each successive time. And that's why they say, like, in order to be good at something, you have to do it multiple times and fail multiple times, because that's literally the way your brain is working. Like, your brain has to do something multiple times until it gets better at it. Like, no one was born being a super athlete. No one was born knowing how to play the piano or all these instruments. No one was born knowing any of these things. The thing is that they do it so many times that you just learn it, right? But it's not like hard science. And that's what a lot of times with these super athletes or everyone that you admire too, they're not superhumans. They're humans like all of us. They have skin and blood. Like, they're humans. The only thing is that they took a lot of time and dedication to serve something that they loved, and they become experts on it. But it's because of this repetition that the neurons make those bridges, and they are so strong from it that it's easier for them to do something that for the rest of the people are like, oh my God, I could never do this. Yeah, you could. You just have to put the dedication and time, right? So neurons, as I said before, are connected by these bridges called axons. So axons are like electric cords that send information from a neuron to another, right? So if information is sent repeatedly, the cord gets thicker, because that means that it's more important because you're thinking about all the time. So it's the same with electric devices. So I will show you something here. So my charger of my computer is, you can see, thicker and longer and just like a mess kind of. However, the charger for my phone is just this. It's smaller, it's thinner. And that's because our computer needs more energy than our phone. So the same with the brain. When you do something so repeatedly many times, those axons are gonna get thicker because you do that more times, right? Because you're doing that activity many more times, so that's why the axon gets thicker, the bridge gets stronger in a sense. So where you can, so when I learned this, I was like 15 years old, reading books and also from my own investigation, I decided to like try this, right? I'm a person who's very curious and I just don't like to learn something. I also want to see like, oh, well, is this true or are they lying to me? So I decided to use this. And what I wanted to do is to achieve my goal. So at that time when I was 15, I wanted to go to the USA, but I didn't know any English and I didn't have any money. So I started looking for scholarships and I started learning English by myself. And at first it was really hard because the only English I knew was from high school, which was like to say, hi, how are you? That's it, like basic English. But I wanted actually to learn it. But it was really hard because no one of my parents speak the English and no one knew English. So I did it by myself and I started with Duolingo. Many of you know of this app. It's an app to learn a new language. And there I started watching movies with subtitles. So at first was very, very hard. I barely understood anything. And then I found a new trick with watching movies. So this is about advice for people who want to learn a language. If you want to improve your grammar, you should watch. So let's say I want to learn English, okay? So what I did is like I wanted to improve my grammar. I wanted to know how to write things in English. So what I would do is I would watch the movie in Spanish with the Spanish audio, but with subtitles in English, because then I could like hear Spanish and understand, but read the words in English so I could remember how the words were written. However, that's to learn grammar. However, if I wanted to learn like listening and comprehension, what I will do is I will put the movie in English with audio in English with subtitles in Spanish, because instead of focusing on how the words were written, I was just focusing how they speak, what was their accent, what was their pronunciation, right? So this slight difference made a huge change for me because I was training my brain to focus on one subject at a time and make it much better. So after I was really good at listening and also reading the words in English, I did it both at the same time, audio in English with subtitles in English. And that's what I do still to this day. And every time I'm just relearning and like also hearing new words, I know how it's written. But at first you should do this. If you want to learn a language and you want to focus on the grammar, watch the movie in your native language with subtitles in the language you want to learn. But if you want to learn comprehension, how to listen to them and understand what they're saying, then watch the movie in that language you want to learn with subtitles in your original language. So I started focusing on that, and over time I started getting more understanding, but I also apply it. It wasn't just watching the movie and that's it, because that's a passive way of learning a new language. You also have to be active and proactive. So what I did is start journaling. So I will take a notebook and I will start journaling, saying how was my day. At first it was a mess because I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to write I'm happy or I'm sad or I'm this or I'm that. But by doing that, I realized how many things I didn't know. So I will look it up and then I start using those words. And by journaling, I was using the knowledge I learned from the movies and actually applying it. So now looking back at the time, I actually didn't know what I was speaking. I was making so many mistakes and errors, but that was needed because I needed to make those mistakes. So now I can speak English and understand English and study in English and basically do everything in English. But you have to start somewhere, and that's the thing that many people are afraid of, is just to start at something. You're gonna be bad, like that's it. There's no other way, but that's okay. Once you embrace that, you're free. Like you can just keep going until you get better. The same with this podcast. Like I started this podcast 2 weeks ago, and I'm trying to get better and better and better. So in a year from now, when I look at this podcast and the episode, I'm gonna be like, oh my god, I was doing this, and this. But I needed to make those mistakes to learn and to be better in the future. So that's what I did with my brain. I was reinforcing my brain to learn something new and to make those new connections to be able to speak English. So this ability of modifying your brain, like Play-Doh, like plastiline, it's called neuroplasticity. And that's what we can observe with people that go through an accident. So you maybe have seen many movies in which someone have an accident and lose a limb, an arm or a leg or whatever maybe, And over time, that person becomes better with the other limbs, right? And that's because your brain rewired itself, so it modifies for your benefit. So that's called neuroplasticity. But it doesn't only happen with people who have accidents. You do it in your normal life. When we're little, we have more neuroplasticity, which means our brain can modify easily, because the brain is growing when we're little, and that's why it's so much easier to learn a language when you're little. However, when we're older, the neuroplasticity kind of decreases, but it's still there. It's just not as easy as in the past, but you can still do it. So many people that say like, oh, I cannot learn language because I'm too old. That's just excuses. Yes, it's going to take you harder than a kid that has 5 years old, definitely. But you still can do it. Like, your brain is never stopping learning, stopping growing. Your brain is always functioning until the day you die. So you always have this ability. As everything else, the brain is also a muscle. So the more that you use it, the better it will get. But you cannot expect to learn a language in 5 months. You have never tried it. Or if you haven't studied Spanish for 15 years, how are you going to learn Spanish in 5 months? It's going to take time, and that's why people don't do it, because it takes time and it takes consistency. But I can tell you that you can do it, whatever you want to achieve. So knowing this, we can literally rewire our brain, and we can do whatever we want. Everything is based on habits, and there is a book called Atomic Habits that talks about this, in which the author explains that we can gain and forget all habits by making small changes in our daily routine. So, for instance, some scientists say that we can incorporate a new habit in 66 days because the repetition is the key. Because again, we're making those bridges between neurons, the axons are getting thicker, and once we have that, is that we are successful at that. And that's what we do with, like, that's when we know with successful stories of athletes that one thing they have in common is that they practice over and over and over again. One day Usain Bolt said, like, people quit in the gym after a couple of months because he didn't see any results, and he practiced for 4 years to run for less than a minute. You know what I mean? It's the repetition that gets us better, because they're rewiring their brain. So in order to be able to control our brain, we have to determine what we want to focus on. That's the most important thing. The brain is like a powerful machine, but you have to give him a task to focus on it. It is determined that we have around 60,000 thoughts per day. That is a ton of thoughts. And this is the scary part. 90% of the thoughts that you have every day are repetitive, which means that what you're thinking today is the same you were thinking yesterday and yesterday and yesterday. And this is shocking, because that means that everywhere we focus on the same things, which means we don't advance. So if we focus on the negative, the brain is gonna just look at the negative, because the brain focuses on the things that you give it to. So we have seen also by human history that the brain is negative by default, because it was trying to survive in the past. However, we're not in that kind of environment anymore, so we don't need to be in a danger mode anymore, or like warning mode anymore. And that's why many people have anxiety, and they cannot just relax, because the brain is just thinking negatively, and that's why they cannot enjoy of life. So that's why you have to shift your attention and tell your brain, hey, we're not thinking negatively, we're thinking of this, and this. So we don't need to do that right now, because the default mechanisms affect our overall well-being. So by having negative thoughts, not only affects our well-being, but also our physical well-being. Like, it's demonstrated that stress is one of the main factors that causes many diseases in our bodies. Just stress. So it's not just like, oh, I have anxiety, it's just a mental thing. It also affects your body. So it's really important we have control of our thoughts. So how can we do this? So in order to have control of our thoughts, because we have so many, it is impossible to control 60,000 thoughts a day. We have to, like, kind of guide our brain like a little kid, like, hey, let's gonna go this way, hey, let's gonna think this, hey, let's not gonna touch this. So we can, like, train our brain, like, because our brain is like a baby. They doesn't know what to do. It's just acting by default. And that's the thing, you have to rewire your brain literally to the way you want it to work for you. So I'm gonna give you a couple of steps, a couple of tips that will help you to do this. I also try to do this. By any means, I'm trying to say, hey, I'm an expert and I know everything about the brain, because every day I also try to get better at these things. But I believe that if you do these things, you will definitely improve a lot in your daily life and you will see the change. But you have to do consistent, and repetition is the key. So the first one is journaling. So journaling will help you do a clarity of mind as well as establish your goals and what you're focusing on. Because we have so many thoughts in our brain and we cannot stop thinking. By putting things written, you can see with your eyes, you are writing with your hands, so you have a lot of different senses engaged, and you can organize your thoughts. You can have a little bit of clarity, and that's essential for everything you want to do in life, and also to put goals. The second thing is meditation. So meditation is proven that has endless benefits, and it helps you with stress and anxiety. Meditation is really hard, but meditation, people think meditation is like this fancy activity, complicated, only Buddhists can do it. It's just really, 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 really easy. So you can just sit anywhere, hopefully in a place that is quiet, and then just don't do anything, like nothing. Don't go to your phone, don't put headphones on, like nothing, just be. At least for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, as long as you can be. And every day try to go a little longer and longer. And at first you're gonna be like thinking of what you have to do before, what you have to do after, past, the present, the future, all the times connected. But the key is like when you're catching yourself thinking of those things, come back to the present. And one way to come back to the present is breathing. Breathing is a powerful activity that makes you feel grounded to the present moment, right? Right now I'm breathing and I'm not thinking of breathing. However, if I stop and I start thinking of breathing, then it will take me to the present. The third one is working out. So being active not only helps your body, but also it has neural health. It can literally reduce the risk of cognitive decline. And in many studies have been proven that the main activity that helps you with cognitive decline is not doing puzzles or reading, which I encourage reading because I love reading, but the main activity to reduce that risk of neural decline and cognition is exercising. Like nothing can compares with exercising. And I'm not saying become a power lifter. I mean, go for a walk, run, lift weights, whatever it may be that you enjoy doing, but you have to move your body. The other one is having a positive attitude. We can literally change our moods and behavior by having a positive attitude. It is proven that even a fake smile will make your brain think that you are happy. And that's what synthesis says, fake it until you make it. It is literally real. Like your brain, it's like a baby. The brain doesn't know what it's doing. You have to tell them what it's doing. So if I'm like sad, and then I'm listening more sad songs and I start thinking, I'm gonna be depressed. However, if I'm sad, I allow myself to be sad for a couple of minutes, but then I'm like, okay, no, I'm fine. And at first I'm not gonna be fine. But if I keep pretending, then yes, I'm gonna be fine. Of course, if you have deeper issues to solve, please solve them, don't ignore them. But what I'm saying is that you have to guide your brain of what active behaviors, states, feelings you want to have. And the last one, which I think is the most powerful one, is visualization. So it is proven that your brain cannot tell the difference between real versus imaginary situations. I'm gonna read this again. It is proven that your brain cannot tell the difference between real versus imaginary versus a real versus an imaginary situation. Therefore, visualizing has multiple benefits. In the 1990s, there was a group of scientists trying to prove if visualization was real or not. So they grabbed a couple of athletes, runners, and they made them lay down and put like electrodes in their brain, and they told them, visualize like as you were running. Just think you're running, how will you run, your routine, whatever it may be. And they recorded how the brain activity, right, of what they were thinking about. And then they took them to the actual field and then make them run. And they recorded the brain activity when they're actually running, and then compare both scans and realize the same brain areas were activated when they were imagining they were running than when they were actually running, which means the brain cannot tell the difference when something is real when something is imaginary, which is crazy. Like it is crazy if you understand the meaning of it and the power that is in those discoveries. It is crazy. So that's why many times when you focus on the good things that you visualize and you become in that state of mind, those things are going to happen to you because the brain doesn't differentiate what is real and what is not. So by implementing small changes in our daily life, we can see a huge change in your life, and we can do that starting today. As Lao Tzu said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So it's up to you to decide what to do. After this speech, you can have two thoughts: one day or day one. Thank you. I'll see you next time.